The car arrived on a Thursday. Black, German engineering. Precisely the model he had described to his colleague 18 months earlier when they were discussing goals. He stood in the parking spot and looked at it for a moment. Then he drove it home. Then he drove it to work the next day. By the following Tuesday, it was simply the car, the thing he moved inside when he needed to be somewhere else. The payment for which exits his account every month automatically, joined by the insurance payment, the parking fee, the premium fuel, because the manual specified it. The watch on his wrist has a name that means something at dinner parties. He stopped noticing it 11 months after he bought it. The apartment in the neighborhood that required the salary that requires the hours. He has been in it enough years that he no longer sees the ceiling when he's lying awake at 3 in the morning. He just sees darkness in the specific darkness of a man who has acquired everything he was told to acquire and arrived somewhere that was not described in the brochure. The brochure did not include this part, the Tuesday morning part, the part where you're doing everything right by every external metric and the interior is making a sound like a building settling, not collapse, just the continuous low-frequency groan of a structure carrying more weight than it was designed for. Arthur Schopenhauer would not be even slightly surprised. He predicted this with the precision of a man who had looked directly at the mechanism of human desire without the softening filter of optimism, and what he saw was the most uncomfortable possible truth. The race you have been running was never designed to end. The finish line is a prop. It moves. There is a specific type of man who watches this kind of video. Not the man who is failing, the man who is succeeding and cannot explain why the success is not producing what the success was supposed to produce. If that sentence landed, you are in the right place. If you are in a room right now that looks like everything you were supposed to want, and something is wrong that you cannot name, keep watching. That unnamed thing is the entire subject. Schopenhauer's philosophy begins with a concept he borrowed from Eastern thought and ran through the machinery of German metaphysics. The will. Not will in the small sense, not willpower, not individual determination. The will, with a capital letter. The blind, insatiable, purposeless drive that Schopenhauer believed constitutes the deepest layer of reality. Not a force with goals, not a process with a destination. A perpetual striving that has no object except itself. It wants without knowing what it wants. It moves without knowing where it's going. And in human beings it manifests as desire, the continuous, restless hunger for the next thing, the better thing, the thing that will finally produce the satisfaction that the thing before it promised and didn't deliver. The rat race is the will made into a social architecture. It takes the blind internal striving and gives it a track, gives it stages and milestones and titles and objects. The starter apartment becomes the better apartment, becomes the house in the right school district. The entry-level salary becomes the mid-level salary, becomes the senior compensation package. The economy car becomes the respectable car, becomes the car that signals arrival. At each stage, the acquisition produces a brief, genuine period of satisfaction, the relief of attainment, the warmth of having moved forward, the pleasure of the thing being new, and then the new wears off. And the will, having no actual object, redirects. The hunger returns. The next milestone assembles itself on the horizon. You start running again. This is not a character flaw. This is the architecture of desire itself, and Schopenhauer was explicit about the fact that no amount of willpower, discipline, or life optimization changes the fundamental mechanism. The man who earns more does not escape the pendulum. He swings between larger objects of desire and proportionally larger disappointments. The size of the swing increases. The duration of each satisfaction remains approximately constant. You never get ahead of the mechanism by running harder. You only expand the circuit. Here is the specific anatomy of the trap, because abstract philosophy is only useful when it maps onto the texture of your actual days. You want the promotion. The wanting is genuine. You can feel it. It motivates real behavior. It organizes your attention and your effort. You pursue it with discipline and skill. You get it. And for some period, sometimes weeks, sometimes a few months, the having feels like the wanting promised it would feel. You are senior now. You matter in the meeting in a way you didn't before. Your compensation reflects a category upgrade. The satisfaction is real. Then it isn't. Not because something went wrong. Because nothing went wrong. Because this is exactly how the mechanism operates. The acquisition neutralizes the desire that drove the acquisition, and desire, being the organism's baseline operating mode, finds a new object. The senior role becomes the standard condition, and what was once the goal becomes the floor, and the ceiling is now somewhere higher, and you are once again in the position of wanting something you don't have. The critical detail that Schopenhauer identified, and that the productivity industry actively suppresses because its entire business model depends on you not realizing it, is that the satisfaction interval does not scale with the difficulty of the achievement. The harder you worked, the more you sacrificed, the longer the pursuit. The satisfaction is not proportionally deeper. It fades at approximately the same rate as the satisfaction from smaller achievements. The cost scaled up. The return stayed constant. This is the fundamental dishonesty of the meritocratic promise, that extraordinary effort produces extraordinary, lasting satisfaction. It produces ordinary, temporary satisfaction. The extra cost is pure extraction. The man who quits the rat race is not the man who gives up. That is the story the race tells about him to discourage others from following. He is the man who has done the philosophical accounting and found the numbers don't work. He has traced the mechanism clearly enough to see that the satisfactions the race promises are structurally incapable of delivering what they promise. Not because the objects are worthless. The car is a fine car. The title represents real competence. The apartment is genuinely good. But because the satisfaction of objects is temporary by design, and the cost of continuous acquisition is permanent by structure, and at some point the honest man looks at the ledger and recognizes a deal that was always asymmetric. The question that naturally follows, and it's the question the race has no good answer for, is, if not this, then what? Schopenhauer had a partial answer. He was a pessimist, which means he was not going to offer you a motivational reframe. He was not going to tell you that you just needed to find your passion or align your purpose or build your personal brand. His answer was quieter, more demanding, and ultimately more sustainable than any of those alternatives. Reduction of want, not as deprivation, as liberation. The man who needs less is structurally freer than the man who needs more. Not because poverty is virtue. Schopenhauer was not ascetic in the punishing sense, but because the scale of your external requirements determines the scale of your dependence. The man who requires the premium car, the premium apartment, the premium everything to maintain his self-concept is hostage to whatever system produces the income necessary to fund those requirements. He cannot leave the job he hates because the job funds the life that he is identified with. He cannot say no to the client who treats him poorly because the client funds the structure. He cannot take the risk, pivot the direction, spend a year on something that won't pay for 6 months, because the overhead won't permit it. The man who needs less is a man with options. And options, the ability to choose differently at any juncture, are the concrete form that freedom takes in practical life. This is the financial philosophy that Schopenhauer points toward, though he never articulated it in those terms. The rat race's most effective trap is not the work. The work is often genuinely engaging, and men who love their work are not necessarily trapped. The trap is the lifestyle inflation that shadows every income increase with a proportional increase in expenditure, ensuring that the surplus, the actual material of freedom, the gap between what you earn and what you need, never meaningfully expands. You get the raise and the apartment gets bigger, the car gets better, the vacations extend, the wardrobe upgrades, the restaurant tier elevates. Every improvement in income is immediately converted into an improvement in visible lifestyle, and the freedom that the income increase theoretically created is instantly spent on the identity maintenance the higher income now requires. The man who does not do this, the man who allows his income to grow without proportionally growing his expenditure, accumulates something that no job title can provide: actual optionality, actual capacity to choose, actual distance between his survival and his work, between his basic needs and his obligations, that gives him the room to make decisions that are not made under financial duress. This man is not impressive at dinner parties. He does not wear the watch. His car is adequate, but he can quit tomorrow if the situation requires it. He can take the meeting with the thing that doesn't pay yet, because the overhead permits the experiment. He can say no to the opportunity that pays well but costs something he isn't willing to pay. He is, in the only sense that survives the accounting, free. The race has a name for him. They call him underachiever. They call him someone who didn't live up to his potential. What they mean is, He refused to convert his potential into a lifestyle that required him to sell it indefinitely to maintain. He accepted that transaction with his eyes open. He declined. Schopenhauer's pendulum swings between desire and satisfaction, and at the end of the swing where satisfaction lives, it always finds something waiting that he did not fully theorize but gestured at. Boredom. The specific, hollow emptiness of the man who has gotten everything he wanted and finds the having insufficient. The tedium of arrival. The quiet horror of the Sunday afternoon when there is nothing to want, because you have assembled all the objects of desire and they are sitting around you silently refusing to produce the feeling they promised. The race protects against boredom by ensuring there is always a next thing, always another milestone to organize your wanting around. The man who exits the race must confront boredom directly, without the anesthetic of the next acquisition. This is actually the most demanding part of the exit, more demanding than the financial adjustment, more demanding than the social judgment, the confrontation with your own interior when the distraction machinery is turned off. What do you actually want when wanting is not organized by the race's catalog? What does engagement feel like when it's not performance for an audience? What does a day feel like when you are not measuring it against a metric that someone else defined? These questions are uncomfortable in proportion to how long they have been deferred. The man who has spent 20 years in the race has spent 20 years not asking them. The silence they arrive in is unfamiliar and initially threatening. He will be tempted to fill it with new objects, new goals, new metrics, a different kind of achievement theater. He will mistake the discomfort of genuine freedom for evidence that freedom was the wrong destination. Push through the discomfort. The genuine interior, the actual preferences, desires, and drives of the man who exists when the performance is off, is on the other side of it. Not immediately, not cleanly, but it's there, and it has been waiting with considerable patience for the race to end. The man who quits the rat race does not become passive. He becomes selective. He works, often intensely, on the things that have survived the audit, the things that would still matter if nobody was watching, if there were no external validation, if the LinkedIn post was never written. He pursues them with the specific quality of engagement that is only available to the man who is not performing the engagement for an outside audience. Presence instead of demonstration. Craftsmanship instead of content. The satisfaction of doing something well rather than the satisfaction of being seen doing something well. These are not the same satisfaction. The second fades at the rate described above. The first is renewable. Schopenhauer believed that art and philosophy and genuine creative engagement were the closest available approximations of freedom from the will, the temporary suspension of the insatiable wanting in the experience of something larger than personal desire. The man absorbed in genuine creation, genuine understanding, genuine engagement with something that transcends his immediate self-interest, is the man who has briefly stepped off the pendulum, not by acquiring something, by dissolving temporarily into something that isn't the self that needs to acquire. This is available to any man, in any context, in the focused hour of work done for its own sake rather than its instrumental value, in the conversation conducted for genuine connection rather than social positioning, in the physical practice attended to as an end in itself rather than as an optimization project, in the walk taken with no destination, no pace requirement, no podcast filling the silence, just the walk, just the present, just the rare experience of a man who is not currently pursuing anything. Reclaim that. It is the only thing the race actually stole from you, and it requires no acquisition to recover. Let's make this more concrete because the philosophy collapses without the practical anchor. The exit from the rat race is not a dramatic event. It is not a resignation letter and a one-way ticket somewhere photogenic. The men who frame it that way are still inside the race's logic, still organizing their identity around a grand gesture that produces content and external validation and a new kind of performance. They have not exited the race. They have rebranded it. The real exit is quieter. It happens in the spreadsheet before the decision, not after. It happens when a man sits down and does the actual arithmetic, not the aspirational arithmetic of what he'd like to earn, but the functional arithmetic of what he genuinely needs. What number specifically represents the threshold at which his basic life, the food, the shelter, the health, the relationships, the few genuine pleasures that survive the audit, is covered? What is the actual floor, stripped of the lifestyle inflation, stripped of the status maintenance, stripped of the purchases that serve the performing self rather than the actual self? Most men have never done this calculation. They have a vague sense of what they need because the race discourages precision. Precision reveals that the floor is lower than the race requires you to believe, and a man who knows his floor might stop running to fund everything above it. The race prefers the floor to remain abstract, inflated by aspiration, invisible behind the question of what you deserve, what someone with your background should be living like, what your peers are maintaining. Do the calculation. Write the actual number. The clarity of it when it arrives is disorienting the first time. The gap between what you need and what the race has convinced you to need is where your freedom is being stored. The other half of the exit that nobody talks about is identity surgery. More difficult than the financial restructuring, more personal, more resistant to straightforward analysis. The man who has been in the race for years has allowed his identity to merge with his professional and material position in ways that he is often not aware of until the moment he contemplates removing them. His job title is not just a description of his function, it is a component of his self-concept. His car is not just transportation, it is a three-dimensional statement about where he has arrived. His neighborhood, his apartment, his watch, his wardrobe, each carries identity weight, communicates his position in the hierarchy, provides the daily, ambient confirmation that he has achieved something recognizable. Strip those away, even conceptually, in the exercise of asking what if I didn't have them, and what remains. This is the question the race is specifically designed to prevent you from asking. Because if the answer is uncertain, if the stripping exercise reveals that a significant portion of your self-concept is load-bearing on external objects and social positions, then the entire structure of the race is revealed as existential scaffolding rather than genuine achievement. You are not building a life. You are building a proof that you are enough. Proof delivered in the language of acquisition to an audience of peers who are building their own proofs and are too busy to actually evaluate yours. The man who does not need the proof is the man who has some other source of self-valuation, internal, durable, independent of what the peer group is currently scoring. He knows what he is actually good at, what he actually values, what he would do if the audience disappeared tomorrow. These are not easy questions and the answers are not always flattering, but they are the questions the race was designed to crowd out, and answering them is the prerequisite for any exit that is genuine rather than theatrical. Schopenhauer's pessimism is not despair. This is the most important clarification about his philosophy, and the most commonly missed. He looked directly at the mechanism of human desire and found it structurally incapable of producing lasting satisfaction. He said this plainly, without comfort, without the safety net of, but if you just find the right goal. He was not selling a better race. He was describing the nature of racing itself. And then, from that position of complete clarity about what desire cannot do, he described what the alternative might look like. Not the suppression of desire. That road leads to the pressure vessel failure described elsewhere. But the progressive reduction of the claim that desire makes on your time, your attention, your peace, and your sense of worth. The practice of needing less, wanting with less urgency, holding your preferences with less grip. Not because you don't prefer things like you will always prefer things the will does not shut off, but because you no longer confuse your preferences with your survival. The man who can want something without needing it, who can pursue a goal without his psychological stability being contingent on its achievement, is the man who has partially escaped the pendulum. Not because the pendulum stopped, because he has loosened his grip on it enough that its swings no longer drag him to their extremes. This is available in increments. You do not need to exit the race completely in a single act. You can begin loosening the grip while still inside the structure. You can start the financial calculation. You can begin the identity audit. You can start noticing, with honest attention, which of your current desires are actually yours and which were installed by the race's catalog. You can practice, in small daily acts, the tolerance of wanting something and not immediately organizing your entire life around acquiring it. Each of these is a small exit, a moment outside the mechanism, a brief experience of the man who exists when the race's noise quiets down, when the next milestone is not currently organizing his attention, when the interior is free from the perpetual forward lean of wanting. That man has always been there. He is not a future version you are working toward. He is the present version that the noise has been obscuring. Turn down the noise. See who's been standing there this whole time. There's a specific category of men who will watch this video and experience something they won't immediately know what to do with. Not the men already on the way out, They know what they're doing, and they're doing it. Not the men who are comfortable and not looking for disruption. They clicked away 12 minutes ago. The specific category is the man in the middle. The man who has accumulated the trappings of the race's success and who knows, in the part of himself he doesn't introduce at dinner parties, that the trappings are not sufficient. Who does his job well, genuinely well, and who nevertheless feels the particular flatness of a man whose labor serves a system he doesn't particularly believe in, producing outcomes he will not remember in 20 years, for the benefit of something that would replace him without a second thought the moment a cheaper version becomes available. This man is not dramatic about his situation. He is functional. He maintains. He performs the role with enough skill that nobody is worried about him, which means nobody is helping him either, which means the gap between the external competence and the interior hollowness is entirely his to carry, quietly, without the vocabulary to name it. Schopenhauer named it. He called it the suffering inherent in existence, not as condemnation, but as diagnosis. The low-frequency dissatisfaction that runs underneath the functional life is not a malfunction. It is the signal of a man who is living below his own capacity for authentic engagement. It is the sound of the will running on misdirected fuel. The man in the middle has options that he cannot currently see clearly because the race's architecture fills his entire visual field. The calculation has not been done. The floor has not been identified. The identity audit has not been conducted. He is operating on the assumption that the structure he is inside is the only available structure, because every surface of the structure reflects the message. This is what success looks like. This is what a man your age with your abilities should be doing. Continuing is the responsible choice. Continuing might be the responsible choice, but it should be a chosen responsibility, one entered into with clear eyes and an honest accounting of the trade, not a default that operates below the level of conscious decision, because examining it feels too threatening to the structure that depends on it. Do the examination. The structure will either survive it, in which case you've confirmed you're where you should be, or it won't, in which case you've finally located the door. Either way, now you know. The door was always there. Most men spend their entire careers furnishing the cage instead of looking for it. Comment below if you recognize the pattern in your own life. I reclaim my time. Then subscribe, because the next video is about the men in your circle who have a very specific interest in you not reclaiming anything. Carl Jung called it the shadow of the group. What it does to the man who starts growing beyond it is worth understanding before it happens to you.